G'day and welcome to the farm. I'm Katja Williams, the rural mum, and today I'm here speaking with Claire and her kids here on their family farm just out of Geary, New South Wales. Welcome, Claire.
Hi, thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your family and your farm.
Well, this is not my daughter. This
is my daughter.
We've got Lachlan here. Do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Lachlan's just turned 7. Lucy is 2.5. About to turn 3.
And she's about to join us as well.
Yes, she's wearing clothes. Just not that you can see. Oh, thanks for the tissues. Well done. Come over here. Oh, you
brought all the tissues.
All the tissues. Can I have them, please? Thank you. Okay.
Beautiful.
I'll give those.
I'll distribute tissues.
And Lachlan and Lucy and I are very lucky to have Brendan as our husband, or my husband, and dad. And our family farm is a first-generation farm, so we purchased it in May 2012. And we've grown quite considerably since then.
And we're
but this is
harvesting
where we live.
popcorn?
We are harvesting popcorn at the moment. So we're irrigators, some groundwater, some river water, and some dryland cropping. And we are starting our breeding of an Angus herd. And up until about 2 or 3 years ago, we were mostly livestock trading. So yeah, we grow a lot of vegetables. So sweet corn, tzatziki beans, and canola, lots of seed crops, and it's pretty busy.
And wheat.
And wheat, that's right. So that's us, and we've got some beautiful staff who I don't really. They're kind of so much part of what we do that I don't really see them as staff in a weird kind of way. So Matthew, I think he's been with us for about 3 years, maybe longer. And Rolf, I think, has been here maybe 6 years. And we've got a couple of contractors that help from time to time. And, yeah, it's busy.
Good. Busy's good.
It's busy, yes. And a great bookkeeper. Yes,
helps.
so yes, I don't do books anymore.
And rain.
Yes.
Excellent. And Claire, what are your... what's your role in the farm and the setup?
Well, you're talking to me at a really interesting time. So I've just turned 40, and for me personally, I'm not entirely sure why I'm so driven. I think a lot of women in regional areas are either very, very, very happy at home raising children and being in a support role with their husband, either in a bookkeeping role or sort of being that glue kind of role, or they're also wanting something a bit more. And I was very much humbled by my husband a few years ago, Goody Alforsi, who basically said, look, Claire, we've got these really little kids, we probably don't need to keep buying farms at the moment. Whereas for me, I was hell set on purchasing lots and lots and lots of farms and growing the business to a size where I'm not entirely sure why, but I was just really, I enjoyed the challenge of expanding. So when my husband signalled a couple of years ago after Lucy was born that he really wanted to spend some time with our children, I was like, okay, fair enough. So I exited out of our farm business at a day-to-day kind of level. We've got a beautiful business coach, and every quarter we catch up as a business to look at our strategic, financial and productive goals. So I attend those meetings, which are half-day meetings, and if they have any other sorts of legal issues that I can assist with, then obviously I will do that. But more often than not, I'm really not aware of what's happening on the farm anymore.
Yeah.
And that has been massive. And we're still really adjusting, I think, to that. Huge change. And in many respects, I think it's one of the reasons that this podcast, I think, is so powerful, because there's no one way to do farming.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's certainly been a big couple of years, quite a lot of loss and grief. And I think Brendan, to some extent, has certainly felt a bit lonely. But I felt like I'd really supported him for over 10 years to acquire the farms and set up systems and secure staff and all those sorts of things. And if my drive wasn't going to be satisfied on the farms, I really needed to respect Brendan's wish to just slow down. So I needed to put my energy somewhere else.
Yep. Yep. Understand that feeling?
Yes. Well, I think a lot of us do, you know, like you kind of got to find that, you know, sweet spot. And in many respects, like I had because our main income has been from the farm and I've just been working 2 or 3 days a week as a solicitor, I haven't really ever dared to dream about what kind of off-farm income I could generate other than just paying for groceries and things.
Yep.
And, I'm like, I could actually potentially contribute to paying off some of the farm debt.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I'm now going, oh, right, okay, well, that's fun. Let's see if we can do that. But in the meanwhile, I got a bit distracted by some commercial property, so I've been buying some commercial property and doing some small renovations and learning a different asset class. So, yeah, I think maybe repaying the farm debt might have to go on hold for a couple of years until I sort of get that out of my system.
When you first started, you know, looking at property and buying up the farm, what was some of the biggest challenges or hurdles that you had to learn and overcome, and how did you do that?
Look, neither Brendan or I had undertaken formal business training at a tertiary or TAFE level. And in hindsight, whilst I thought my upbringing was really very normal, and I think it is, my family, who were in primary production in the Hunter Valley, hadn't really talked about the realities of business, so we didn't really understand cash flow, and we also didn't have any debt on our family farm in the Hunter, and because that was a 5th generation farm. So there were a whole lot of things that I was blissfully unaware of, and so I was mostly focused on the production side, which I think is a very natural sort of thing to be thinking about. Are you making a birthday cake? Thank you.
For somebody's birthday.
Okay, you're going to tip it onto the table? No? Okay. Do you want to leave it there and make another one for me? Okay, thank you. So yeah, just literally the things that I thought were important were looking at building the cash flow budget, figuring out whether the business is going to be profitable or not, and using data from New South Wales DPI for Lucent, for example, or different sorts of financial metrics. And I didn't understand at all just the realities of how farms increase in value, that the industry that we were entering into was basically just capital. And the business of farming was a completely different business. So, and had I realised that we were entering into 2 separate different types of businesses, I think I probably would have gone and got a bit more training.
Yeah.
Like we've been just very lucky, I believe, that land values have increased, water values have increased. A couple of years where we, I think, might have made $50,000 after paying all of our bills, and I'm just thinking, like, what the, you know, like what, you know, the things that really have saved us have been able to go back to the bank and say, look, we have been investing all of our surplus cash and time into developing pivots, building shared silos. Like, we certainly weren't leading or consuming a very luxurious life, but I just don't think I really had any idea. And I'm sure that naivety and lack of financial literacy caused more stress than it really should have. And I often find now...
It's a truck.
That's a good truck, that one.
It is a good track.
That if we had probably done a more detailed or informed business plan and understood what a business coach could do in the 12 months before purchasing the asset, I suspect that we probably would have been far more profitable and probably would have been a whole lot less stressful. But I don't know. I just think that's the things that I really wish that I'd spent time on. And it's boring, and it certainly is not what I think a lot of young farmers want to be doing. Chatting to accountants, lawyers, valuers, going and doing some more training, reading books, talking to people. I don't think people are really interested in that sort of stuff because they just want to get on the tractor and grow the wheat or, just get started with the chickens or whatever it is that they're trying to do. And I just don't think people appreciate the definition of insolvency, the realities of bankruptcy, and how difficult this industry is. I suppose the hurdle that we experienced the most was realising that we had assumed that the business that we had entered into was mostly a production business. And by that I mean everything was focused on, the price of fertiliser or the price of diesel or availability of seed or plant and equipment and or the amount of kilos that the livestock are going to be increasing. And I remember on a weekly or fortnightly basis weighing cattle, I shudder, but it was such a production focused reality. And it was only later on in the process of really thinking about the business that I realised that we actually had two businesses. And I remember Nigel Kieran mentioning this at different young farmer Little River Land Care groups that he was organising at the time. So this is sort of 2013-14. That we were farmers effectively ran two businesses, one being the land business or the water business, and then one was the productive business on top. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't really heard of that concept before. And because neither Brendan nor I had formal training at a tertiary level or at a TAFE level in business, and I presume Marcus Oldham graduates or ag economics graduates would be well versed in this, but the realities of owning a piece of capital, maintaining that capital through capital expenditure, and just the realities of valuations and dealing with banks. Look, I feel like there needs to be an entire program to train people on how to do that. And I do think that what Pip Jobe and Alex Hicks and now the Young Farmer Business Program are doing quite well is actually saying, guys, there's a fair bit involved in this process. We all think that it's about the cattle work, the sheep work, the shearing, the sowing and the harvesting, but in fact it's something that's far more serious than that, and that is acquiring the asset, maintaining the asset, keeping the asset in its best format, and then understanding how that asset can be revalued to enable you to either invest in lots of infrastructure on farm or maybe scale. Yeah. And I think I now just sort of shudder at the ignorance and naivety, but I suppose that's what happens when you're 28 and you just are having a go.
Yeah. And it's the difference between working in your business and on your business.
Oh, very much so. And, I have some of the most incredible younger farmers, so anywhere between the ages of 28 and, say, 50, who are either have come from a family farm, or they might be from a completely other industry and wanting to enter into agriculture. and they often really are now far more wise than what we were. So I think things have changed quite dramatically since we kicked off. But as we were chatting earlier, I am wondering if some of the hurdles that Brendan and I navigated in the last decade, we probably had softer landings than possibly what the next decade has coming for similar sorts of younger farmers. Like interest rates going up, commodity prices being largely uncertain. I know commodity prices are always uncertain, but there just sort of seems to be an element of genuine, look, the spread is going to be a lot bigger than what it could have been. And the realities of climate change actually not being something that might happen, but we're living in. And then the bank's response to those sorts of challenges, I kind of wonder if the younger farmers coming in and growing are going to have... I kind of worry a little bit. But also the bravado and blissful ignorance of youth is probably what enables people to enter into agriculture anyway.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to shield them and enable them to kind of learn and grow and make mistakes, but also you kind of want to go, hey, when you get to this left and right turn, please turn left and then do a U-turn and go right. But, you just, A, no one likes unsolicited advice, and B, sometimes the most incredible asset that we have is our knowledge, and often wisdom comes from just experience.
Yeah.
And you never ever learn better than when you've had a mistake.
No, and you never listen better than when it's your mistake.
That seed crop that in our first year where we had germination at 93.5, and then our contract said that we'd only be paid at a seed value at 95% germination. And realising the difference between a seed price and a feed price, something like $4,000 a tonne difference, and then learning later on through the industry grapevine that seed company just blended other seed that was 97% germ to lift ours from 93 to 5. So they made, an enormous amount of money. And we lost $400,000 in that crop in our first very year. And I just think, that experience for me meant that A, we'll never trust like we did trust, and B, I now read contracts very, very, very carefully, and will never, ever be in that situation again. And the person that did that, I will watch him throughout his entire career, and I'll always tell people what happened. And I just think how interesting it was that these guys making a really small profit of $400,000 or whatever it was. I just think how naive and stupid that decision was at a corporate level, because we'll never grow with those guys ever again. And as we've grown, and we will continue to grow, I just think it was such a good lesson for me that agriculture is a tiny sector, and be careful where you shit, because...
Everyone knows everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone knows everyone.
and I mean, in the scale of like that size business, 400,000 isn't very much. And I just remember thinking that would have just been so that particular fellow's that financial year he would have made his budget, and he probably would have been given another $30,000 or $40,000 in his personal bonus. And I'm thinking,
was it worth it?
Was it worth it? And yeah, but anyway, I think they're the sorts of learnings that I don't think anyone can really sort of say, hey, read this book and you'll get this learning. Yeah. Or maybe there are books out there.
Not that I've seen. If you've got a book like that,
yeah.
help a girl out.
yeah. But I mean, it was such a great, it was a really good learning that honesty, transparency, authenticity and values, and the fact that in agriculture it is a long-term business relationship. And it really was a good learning experience for us, because during the most recent drought, and you guys might be similar because you had access to some water, but I felt sick. Like we had designed a business based on when everyone else was dry that we would have a little bit of water, not all of our water, but a little bit of water, and that we would probably be able to keep trading through and hopefully maintain some seed stock or breeding stock or whatever. But I was not prepared at all for just that 3 or 4 years of brown and everyone else really not going well and us having a little bit of green in our paddocks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt a bit sick, but I found that I've been so clever to think about this business, but then it kind of worked too well in a weird kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
But I've since learned that agriculture is actually the only time that some farmers make money is when other farmers don't do so well. Yeah. And I grew up with potatoes, and, when it was flooding in somewhere, then our potato price was really good. But then when we were hit by floods in Maitland, the other people's potatoes were really well. And I think commodity prices and commodity markets are based just on supply and demand.
And I think that's also thinking about where you've got to go into the mindset of niching down into this is what we are doing, this is what we have planned for, and try and bring in your perspective, because otherwise the pressure on you is enough during the drought, let alone to open it up to what others are doing and what others are thinking, unless it's very poignant into helping each other out. And that's, I think you get that feeling because you want to help out, you want to help someone, but in the same time you don't want it to land in a big boisterous type of here, let me help you. It's nothing like that, but you can say, all I want to do is help, but I don't think it'll land well at the moment. So it's picking your time and reeling everything back into a time where you can open back up to others.
Yeah.
That's a hard line to walk.
Very much so. But I think that example of being treated so poorly by that seed company in Toowoomba in 2013 taught me that there wouldn't have been a worse time for that to have hit us. So we'd only just purchased the farm in May. Yeah. We'd harvested it in March, April, and we were kind of sweating on that income coming in. We just paid all the stamp duty. So as a first generation farmer, we didn't have the intergenerational stamp duty exemptions. So we had to pay the full ad valorem. And I think the farm was about 2.4 million. I can't remember the stamp duty that we paid, but I think it was around 130 or 140,000. And then you have to pay for all of the crop going in. So there might have been another $400,000. The bank would only give us a small $75,000 overdraft. And so it was kind of like that year where everything went out, and the interest bills were 12,000 or I don't know. They were just insane. Yeah. And I remember going, well, this has been fun. Even though the cash flow budget was really well researched by someone like me using my spreadsheets, I don't think the day-to-day realities of cash flow kind of hit. And so when that decision to pay us a feed price versus the seed price, and just the devastation that caused us at a personal level, when the drought happened, we actually reached out to a number of people that had either supplied us with trading animals or were people who had really helped us out over the previous 8 years. And we said, do you mind if you are going to sell any of your animals of any kind, please let us buy them, and you can guide us on which bulls you want, and then when this drought breaks, we'll give you back your animals. Yeah. And we agreed on prices and stuff like that, and
got it written down.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Write it down.
Yeah. Write it down. And some of it. I mean, this is certainly not legal advice, but some of it was just as simple as, look, here's an email. Sometimes, and obviously depending on who you're dealing with, but and then when the drought broke and people had feed again, and they came with their B doubles to come and collect their animals again, and that they could continue on with that breeding stock. I just remember thinking, and that was all Brendan's idea, I just remember thinking, yep, like, A, you feel really good.
Yep.
B, we made a little bit of money. C, they made a little bit of money. And the relationship with those families for hereinafter, and I'm sure we'll hit the skids at some stage and we may need to do the same with our animals or whatever the case is. But I think the surprise, to answer your question, in terms of agriculture is it's certainly no longer a handshake type of business because of the complexities of the business that we're in, but the human relationships and doing what you say you're going to do and just being kind and completely transparent, I think that values piece is critical. And for me, it's probably where the corporates are going to fail. And I think we already see, and we've got some in our district, like people who like trade hay in the middle of drought. Yeah. I'm like, how's that short-term profiteering going? You know, like, what the fuck? Like, anyway, I just sit there and go, everyone's going to completely love you for the rest of your life. Like, why would, you know, it just...
Sometimes it's setting up...
I hope you guys don't
circle.
do... I don't know.
No. Sometimes it's setting up that circle, though, to have that cash flow so that you can still show that money's going out but money's coming in. So sometimes you'll see people will sell their hay during the drought because they can buy it in for less, at a lesser quality, but it's still a rotation of a money stream. So money's going out, money's coming in.
Yeah.
So we're selling, but we're buying.
I suppose what I'm saying is if you're an accountant or you are a wool grower or an oyster farmer or, like, it doesn't really matter who you are, but let's imagine that you genuinely don't grow your own hay.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is going to somewhere in South Australia and Victoria and trucking in cheap hay, you know, without any guarantee of quality, and then just trucking it again, and then the hay actually doesn't even go to your farm. You're just really coordinating at a logistics level. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. I'm not talking...
And hiking those prices.
Correct. It's just putting... It's basically just putting a margin.
Yeah.
And that level of profiteering, I think... it's been interesting to watch that practice being noted and people never forget. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I suppose that's the surprise.
Sometimes we can have short memories in some areas, and we can be very forgiving in some areas. Yeah. But other things we're like, noted.
Yeah. And people don't say much. Like, I think that's the beautiful thing that I've learnt, which is quite different to law, is when people do say something, it says a lot, and people don't say a lot most of the time. Yeah. But they're always watching. Yeah. Always watching. Yeah, which is kind of cool, actually. Yeah. But it certainly is the rules of the game, which are never written down. Certainly.
We could have a head start if they were written.
Well, but I also think like it's kind of like Indigenous families or other sorts of cultures where the law, L-O-R-E, of family and community are handed down through rituals, for example. I think some of the unspoken ground rules of the agricultural sector in New South Wales or in the Central West or Australia or whatever the nuanced sort of culture is, there is a really easy way to learn it, and that's just to sort of attend lots of functions and enjoy speaking to people and just do the right thing. And most of the time over conversations at the back of the ute or an afternoon tea or at a bushfire or whatever, like wherever you are, you'll eventually over a 10 or 15 year period pick it up. And those guys, and especially Ned, for example, who were aged sort of 14, 15 and might have been involved in that, have a head start in many respects. So by the time they're 30, they understand the rules of the game. But women who join their husbands if they've married into a farm, or if you're like Brendan and I, where you have acquired the farm when you were 28, 29, I'm only now really understanding the rules of the game at 40. Yeah. I think I've still got my Masters and PhD to go.
It's like when you first move there, you're like, yeah, I'm the apprentice.
Yeah.
I'm the apprentice, and I've got to look at it from that. And sometimes you've got to be like, wheel it back, explain that to me, because I don't understand how that works. And there's a lot of, like, when you get to a certain age or into a certain time frame that you've been in the game, there's a lot of assumptions of you know how to do it. It's like I turned up to one of my first cattle events, sheep background, no cattle, and I just got handed these 2 bulls to hold in an arena, and I was like, never let a bull, never broken a bull in, but I've turned up with Ned, and people have just given me these bulls, and I'm standing there going, don't move. So there's a lot of assumed knowledge as well. Like that was 10 years ago, but at the time, like that was, like you don't, there's a lot of assumed knowledge and there's a lot that you've got to learn. So definitely starting at that apprentice sort of mindset when you, whether you marry in or whether you buy your own farm, and you've got to start from there.
I remember when Tony Abbott was elected as Prime Minister a few years ago, and he did his Tony Abbott listening tour of the nation. So his first 100 days of office were to just listen. So he went around the nation. And love him or loathe him, I thought it was a really cool thing to basically say he just was really keen. Whether he did it or not, I don't know. But what a lovely concept. And I feel like if I have a daughter who decides to stay in a rural area, like we do have a daughter, but if she elects to stay in a rural area, I'll certainly be saying, look, for the first 5 to 10 years, probably listen more than you talk.
Which is a hard thing to do.
Oh, let me know. I failed miserably. So yeah, that's a hurdle.
That's a hurdle. That's another hurdle.
But I mean, and be very careful who you trust. I certainly think that the Trojan horse and a lot of those old parables around, like the Peloponnesian War, and maritime and military strategy, and there's wonderful books from Roman times which talk about trust and how people trick people. I really think you need to be very careful in social circles and business circles out here, because the person who you think might be the most welcoming and kind and open and trusting person ends up just being the district gossip. And if you are going through a time of losing children through miscarriage, infertility, maybe you're having a really rough time in your marriage, or I don't know, just life might be just throwing you a turd, and you accidentally like release your heart and talk to someone, and then you realise 12 months or 2 years later that that person just is a complete gossip. I just think that's probably one of the things that I just did not realise, and that's probably just comes back to that whole measure twice, cut once philosophy. You know, because once it's out, you can't get it back.
Sometimes that's when you need to reach out for external help, or whether it's a free hotline, or whether you find yourself someone else that you can talk to in confidence.
Yeah.
Which, you know, we don't always have access to being rural, or finding the right person that fits with you. But it's definitely not nice when you sit down and let your heart go and then find out it hasn't landed in the best place.
Yeah. So, but there are some incredible, like the flip side of realising that there are just some absolute bitches out there who take absolute glee and joy in destroying anyone who is trying to have a red hot go. I think for every one of those, there's always 2 amazing gems of women and families who are just wonderful. But it does take a while to kind of figure out who they are.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Just be careful who's wearing country road. Sometimes they are from the country and sometimes they just like to look like a fashion model. And I think, yeah, I don't know. And I think also the background of being a solicitor means that when people talk to you about things, it's just a given that you just don't say it to anyone.
Yeah.
Not even my husband.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I suppose I probably just had no idea that gossip is a commodity in its own right out here. And I just find it... Anyway, it says so much more about someone else when they're talking about someone. I far prefer to talk about stock markets, commodity markets, weather, gardening, children, than talking about another woman.
Stick to safe topics.
Yeah. And I now have no qualms in the middle of a chat with women when they're talking about someone saying, hey, I don't do gossip. Do you mind if we just move on? Because, I don't think this is cool. And people often are a bit shocked. And I'm just like, well...
Like, not your news to share.
Yeah, if we want to talk about that person, well, let's do that, but let's invite them here so we can ask them directly. Oh, you don't want to do that? Oh, okay. Anyway.
What is the best piece of advice you were given either before or after moving to the farm that's really resonated with you? It's a hard one.
It's a really hard one. And I'm sure that there are others, but the one that pops to my mind at the moment and also pops to my mind from time to time is my mum. So we've exchanged contracts. So February 2012 exchange contracts. The vendor wanted a longer settlement term to harvest some crops, and that's fine. And I realised that we're about $90,000 short in cash to settle, about like 2 months beforehand. And so we're selling houses and, we're really like getting stuck into getting ready to buy this farm. And I call my mum and dad. Mum and dad are, they don't holiday very often, very hardworking farmers, but on this particular time they were walking in Italy. And I was like, Mum, look, can I please get a loan? And she's like, no, you guys are stupid enough to, we've all said to you, borrowing 75% is ridiculous. And and everyone had said, look, this is stupid. You really shouldn't do this. And I was like, okay, well, thanks, Mum. I knew we were on our own, but I now know we are very much on our own. And
enjoy your walk.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you when you get back.
But I mean, they've always been like that, which has been, I think, a very good quality. But it made me realise that we were very much on our own. So I then called the vendor, who happened to be a barrister, and said, do you mind if I talk to you about some vendor finance? And I'm mortified at this point, but I'm thinking, well, we've paid the deposit. We're not going to lose our $240,000 deposit plus the stamp duty, and we're just like, failure is not an option. And so it went down, and he was like, sure, I'll give you some vendor finance. I think it was like either 8 or 10% or something, and I was like, like that is, we just like the cash flow budget does not allow that. Okay, no, can't do that. Right, I call my grandma, and she's like, sorry, I wish I could, but if I did it for you, I have to do it for the other 9 of you, so no. And I was like, they're cool,
Yep.
Okay, Claire, what are we going to do? And I think I ended up going back to the bank and just saying, rightio, we're going to have to borrow a bit more. And the bank's like, you're kind of at your limit. I'm like, yep, I understand that, but here's my 10-point plan on how to get out. If something goes wrong, this is what we're going to do. And one of them was chopping wood.
We'll do anything.
Yeah, we'll do anything. And they were like, oh, this is that. And they were selling, items of equipment and, a few bits and pieces. And so they said, okay, we'll kind of give you that balance, but we want it back within 12 months. And I was like, phew, okay. But the piece of advice that during that time of trying to find those last scraps of money to get over the line, my mum had said to me, well, look, the location that you've bought the farm is a good one, and you'll be easily able to sell it if it doesn't go well. And I remember thinking at the time, like, it was like a smack to the face. But I remember thinking, oh yeah, okay, well, I suppose if this experiment doesn't go well, we'll hopefully get our money back, And I remember thinking at the time, actually, that's really clever advice. And over the years, as we make decisions to buy another farm, or as we decide to enter into another lease, or if we go and, we just put in some new silos and they were just eye-wateringly expensive and different things. It was like, well, fortune favours the brave, but you always have it to sell. And I remember thinking, okay, and I suppose that sort of, from a first-generation perspective, meant that we always had a plan B. And I just think it doesn't really matter if you're inheriting a farm and you have to find some cash to pay someone out or whatever it is. But, yeah, the location of where you are, if it's the farm or whatever you're buying, can you sell it? And so having a beautiful wardrobe of clothes, or having an immaculate house which is recently renovated, or something where you can't pick it up and sell it, I suppose that has been a really helpful thing for me. And as much as I'd love to renovate the house and all those sorts of things, I've just reminded myself that we're not at that stage yet.
Yeah, so when the farm needs an extra piece of machinery or something like that, it also makes that a bit easier, particularly if you are doing the books and haven't got any financial training or anything behind you. It's like, okay, we can sell it. So while it adds a little bit of stress to yourself, like, we can sell it.
Yeah. And I think the bank knows that. So your equity partner is fully aware, and that's why they will only provide equity to a certain point. They'll shade it so that they always are guaranteed to get their money back plus interest and economic costs. But I think it's also a really healthy mindset to have, which is, if we're doing something different, or we're expanding or growing or doing whatever it is, we're not going to do it because it could fail.
Yeah.
We're going to do it because we think it's going to work, and in the event it doesn't, well, we're not going to lose a limb, or no one's going to die. It's just going to probably be a bruised ego.
Yeah.
And I think the coming decade, for a lot of my clients and for us here at Booth Ag, I think it's so critical to go, okay, I think we can do this, back ourselves, and what is the plan B, and just do it. And then if it doesn't work, well, at least you tried.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be so many more opportunities in this decade coming than there probably were in the previous decade. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to think about it.
I think that's where that saying comes in, do you have debt? Or you're in debt?
Yeah.
And where do you feel on that scale? I think that's sort of where we're sinking towards in the conversation as well.
100%.
Yeah.
Like there was a fellow in my Nuffield scholarship that rattled that off, and initially I hadn't heard it. It was Brendan that heard it from this fellow, and I wish I could reveal who told it to me, but every time that we would meet with someone, we promised that we'd not reveal their identity. But it was fascinating to understand that certain families had rules, policies, guidelines in relation to how they did debt. And that wonderful difference between having it and obtaining that debt and being a debt that you could therefore sell or get rid of, rather than being in a state of debt and not controlling it. It was it was a really pivotal change point for us, because it meant that we weren't a failure that we're in debt. Because I think compared to a lot of other families that had no debt, and that was then, I was able to verify that when looking at ABARES data, which I only looked at it last week when I was preparing for a presentation I did on Friday down at Marimbula, and there is less than 4% of Australian family farms that have got debt of 60% or more. So that means they've got 40% equity, 60% debt. And out of all of them, and I remember thinking, who on earth can buy a $10 million farm, right, and have a $4 million deposit plus the stamp duty?
Yeah.
Like, hello! But that's what the data is saying, right? Is that if you're a first generation or you are paying out siblings as part of a succession plan, that more often than not, you're going to have at least 60% equity and 40% debt. But more often than not, it was 75% equity and 25% debt. And I just found that, like, fascinating, and I understand why people don't have debt. Like, it's, you know, pretty stressful sometimes. But, like, when you are just beginning, you don't have any choice.
Yeah.
So the best piece of advice was, yes, little Miss Caroline, do it. And don't worry about it, because you can always sell it. Have a go, because you never know. You know, like, you never know what's going to happen after you take that leap of faith. And we've got a couple of mates who have wanted to do buy into farming, or and for whatever reason haven't. And I just think, just start somewhere. It doesn't matter how big. It doesn't need to be fancy. You know, just start. You know, and when you start, you go, oh, it's not that hard.
I can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is manageable. I can do this. Yeah.
So some of the tips that I've learnt from other people have been just to have really low expectations.
Yep.
I just remember going, but how do you do it? And they're just like, I don't know. We just sort of really, sometimes the kitchen is really dirty.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the garden has gone to complete pop.
You can't do it all. Pick what you want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think tips for me have always been, I've had a couple of clients lose young children, you know, a little boy who was 8 and then a little child that was 3 in accidents on farms. So for me, safety has always been paramount. So one of the best things we ever did was put in a pool fence around the front, so that just in that time frame that all of the gates into the yard, so like a lot of family farms, our workshop and the main sort of road into the farm is really close to the house. So making sure that the yard is kid-proof. And also means it's small dog proof as well, which is helpful, and chook proof. But I think Brendan has shown me that children really love being in a header, or they love being in a tractor, and they love being in the ute, and they love being taken along, not for 8 hours. But
not many have the attention span for that. But
but for 3 or 4 hours, like with lots of food. So one of the tips would be go and find an enormous lunchbox and put more food than they need in it, and lots of water and sunscreen and hats and stuff. But I don't know if it's a tip or not, but I have this sense that family farming is changing, and we're seeing that evolve as you and I are growing up as mums. And that is that income from off-farm can be helpful for a range of reasons. And so for us, the ability to have off-farm income ticks lots of serviceability boxes. So when the next farm comes up that might be $10 million or more, the fact that we've got some off-farm income in addition to the farm income means that A, we'll get the loan, B, the cost of the loan will be a bit cheaper, and there's a whole range of reasons why off-farm income is critical. But for me, I really am hoping that being a mum that is involved in the farm from time to time, and then being involved in off-farm businesses off-farm from time to time, means that the children understand that the traditional model is one model, and it's okay to just live life how you want to live it. And I think I really want mums to understand that just because your neighbours aren't doing something, or just because your mother-in-law or your grandmother-in-law or whatever, just because what you want to do isn't what everyone else is doing, it's kind of not a reason not to do it.
Yeah.
And for me, I was a very slow learner to understand I had very little self-esteem and I had very low levels of self-confidence. And another rural mum had done this course called Core Confidence, and it's run by 2 chartered accountants in Sydney. It's for women who are aged between, say, 25 to 45, and it's a short 8-week course, 3 hours a week. It's all online, and ultimately that course for me would single-handedly be one of the most incredible tips I've been given as a rural mum, because over the space of 8 weeks you had to have a small act of confidence each week, and then you had to identify what a big act of confidence was going to be. And for some people it was to try and navigate a pay rise, someone wanted a promotion, some people wanted to set up their own side hustle, some people wanted to go from being an employee to opening their own business, which was me. Some people were on farms, so it was from all across Australia, the US and New Zealand. And so a lot of these women were people that I had no idea about, and there were only like a smattering handful of mums that were on farm that were connected to family farms. But ultimately the same things happened, which was, like trying to navigate, well, I need to be able to have 2 weeks of annual leave a year. I really want to spend time with my husband, or all the sorts of challenges that we have on family farms would happen with other women in other sorts of industries. So it didn't really matter that they weren't. But that course fundamentally showed me that I had permission to do what I wanted to do. And the course designers are very clever because you get to do the course twice in 2 years. So the first time you go it, I think it kind of might open the fruit cake tin to say that, yes, you do have a problem with self-confidence, and yes, you're entitled to do something. And then when you do the course again, within that 2-year period, you're like, well, how do I do this?
Let's get into it.
Right, let's get stuck in. And I thought, tap off to them because it's really clever. But that course, I think, really enabled me to go, well, I want to be a great mum. I want to be a fantastic wife. I want to support the farm, and the farm is really the priority. And I want to be a great daughter, and I want to be a fantastic friend, and I want to have hopefully a nice garden, and I want to have a clean house, and all those things, right? But at the other level, I also wanted to know that I was allowed to do something just for me. And it didn't need to be 5 days a week, and it doesn't need to earn, lots of money. And for me, that has been a huge changing point, and I think as a mum, it's made me a lot happier. And even though Brendo is missing his right-hand woman, I was effectively his secretary for 10 years, I think it's probably been good for him to learn more computer skills and spend more time with the banks and doing a lot more of the financial stuff. And we're really grateful to have a bookkeeper who takes over a lot of the things that I used to be doing. And I now have the absolute privilege of taking the children into Dubbo, going to work and then coming home again, and having a conversation with Brendan and saying, well, how was your day and how was my day? And it's such a wonderful, equal feeling. And I really am grateful for that course. So, I hope that's a good tip.
Not just sitting at the dinner table going, how was your day? And then making mental notes or actually writing notes, being like, okay, I need to follow up with that. Okay, I need to do that. Like, you're able to sort of switch off a little bit in a way.
Very much so. I mean, I'm still very much like clients or will say, oh, what's happening on the farm or whatever. And I really don't have a great idea anymore, which is, I find quite sad. But I also think that the CEO of an organisation, which is people who are running farms, they send their own emails, and they have got methods of chasing up their to-do lists. And if they are successful at managing their time and running their administrative tasks, then they then become really successful CEOs. And I think there's no difference between that person and someone who's running a farm business. And and if people want to bring someone in to help them at an administrative level, great. If they want that person to be their wife or husband, great. But I just found it incredible that was just the unspoken expectation.
Yeah.
You know, and not from a menacing or entitled or mean sort of place, but it's just sort of what was done and expected, and that's just how it is. And I'm just like, what about me?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's been a huge amount of divorces around our district over the last 5 years, and that really put the wind up me, because I was thinking, well, what's the difference between what's happened to their family and what's in our family? And we really don't want to get divorced. I love Brendo, and one of my personal goals is to make his favourite cake on his 83rd birthday, which is a white chocolate mud cake. And so I really want to be that person that goes through the ups and downs of marriage. And I just think, I hope other rural mums understand that if it isn't lighting your fire, it doesn't have to be permanently. Like, I'm sure I'm going to be back in value adding some type of product, marketing, doing something, you know. But at the moment, with young kids, it's just a bit easier.
Yep.
Yeah. I feel like it's a bit of a failure admitting that, but
No.
it's also good just to be honest.
Yeah. That's reality. That's where we are.
Yeah, yeah. And I just have hats off to a lot of other women who can be taking their children on farms, doing some of the physical farm work and the other financial work, and really enjoying melding their children in there. I wish I could be that woman, but I can't.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. But also I think too many people can, like, we've got fantastic staff, right? And I just think, well, how many people should be involved at a management level?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, well, if you're not adding value, or there's someone else who's better at the job than you, and like Matt, for example, for me, I'm like, look, you're heaps better at this than me. You know, we certainly don't need 3 people making decisions.
Yeah.
And having a non-family member as part of the team, working with a married couple, I reckon would be really hard.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have those little marriage tiffs that come in and go out and whatever. And I just think, well, that's not fair on him either, you know. So
The reporting lanes need to be very clear.
yeah, I don't know how I'd be interested to find out how other married couples don't have yelling matches in front of their employees.
Maybe we could ask that in the comment section below. Give us your tips of how you don't do that.
My closing comments would be that at the age of 40, we are only 20 years away from being 60. And when we are 60, our son Lockie will be at the same age that we were when we started our farming journey. And we have single-handedly felt that the ability to run our own race and not have to seek permission, whilst it's been scary and very lonely, the positives have been that we've been able to back ourselves and pivot really quickly. So we've been light on our feet, nimble, being able to react to market opportunities, trading opportunities, farm purchase opportunities, lease opportunities, and we also really want to make sure that that nimbleness and that ability to make management decisions alone needs to be on offer to our children at a young age. So before children come, so similar to what you and I are yarning about. So we have got a fixed retirement date for both Brandon and I, and I've hardwired it into some of our trust documents. because I think the thing that we know is people often change their mind when it comes to succession.
Yep.
And I think, oh, well, they're intelligent people who are very good people and they've changed their mind, so I wonder if I'll do the same thing. Because so much of our identity is linked to what we do when we're on family farms, that I can see how alluring it would be just to say, oh, look, I know we were going to hand the reins over when you were 26, 27, but look, we're in the middle of a drought, or we're just not ready because our super fund doesn't have enough money, or look, we're still young enough, we might just sort of keep going. No, we're going to have a very, very fine line, and from the age of probably soon, we'll start to be chatting to both of the children about if they want to return to the farm as the second generation, what they need to do. They need to finish year 12, they need to go and have some type of tertiary education, whether that's a trade or uni, and we will certainly pay for their schooling up to year 12. They can pay for their own tertiary education with HEX, and they need to go and work for someone else before they come home to us. But they are absolutely guaranteed that if they decide to come home after a few things, that they have that privilege of autonomously making their own decisions. And I think that our generation really needs to challenge ourselves, irrespective of whether succession has started or finished with our parents or grandparents, that the key to successful succession is that it is very much known, and that it's like an unspoken ground rule. Everyone understands what's happening, and therefore there's no doubt, there's no anxiety, there's no surprises, and there's no expectations. And so what I'm seeing at the moment, which I find fascinating, is no one's really spoken about succession, and someone comes home, they've been home for a couple of years, they've still not spoken about succession, and then the relationships, understandably, between the daughters-in-law and the mothers-in-law or the parents-in-law or whatever, start to break down because of natural anxieties. I just think, well, why is it that our generation aren't being very clear with themselves around how they're going to retire and what that looks like? Because we can absolutely do that, and we understand that it's just an estimate in terms of money, and yes, you need to be able to have a few little special things in there just in case there's an ex-nuptial child of one of your children, like they've had a one-night stand and there's been an interesting child arise, and that creates child support issues, or maybe there's been an unexpected divorce at a really young age of our children, or like there'll be certain little asset protection things that will always demand a change to any plan.
Yeah.
Hello.
You're just waking up. You've done so well, darling.
But I think that would be probably my only closing comment would be succession, it's never too early to start. And I hope people are trying. And it's okay to try and fail and then just try again. So I hope that's been
Sometimes helpful. It's about the timing.
Yes. Well, it just at least even having the conversation between Brendan and I, like it was actually quite hard.
Yeah. Then you add a generation in there.
I know, yeah. But it's a good conversation because it means that the conversation once a year you just review it and say, yep.
Yeah. Ned and I have done similar things.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining me, Claire.
Pleasure. Anytime.
Beautiful. So that ends today's interview. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you learnt some tips and tricks and found it very informative. We've had a lovely day out here on the farm. Thank you very much for having us.
Pleasure. Thanks.
And we wish you all the best.
Thank you.